Hola, pod people. This is Dennis, and welcome to another episode of the Grounded Reason podcast. Today, Joel and I sat down and discussed a technology that is really going to add another facet to the internet that we all know and love. The technology is called blockchain. You might know it in the form of the underlying technology that supports Bitcoin. Now I know Bitcoin's kind of got a buzz because there's some, it's money, and anytime you're talking money, people get excited. But really, the thing that's cooler than Bitcoin itself is the technology that supports Bitcoin being blockchain. That technology has so many applications and is actually going to change the way the internet works in the future. And with the internet being such an important facet of cord cutting, we definitely think this applies, and we wanted to give people, a heads up on a technology that is going to, really revolutionize the way the whole thing works. But before I start the show, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you're listening to the episode and you're enjoying what we're doing, if you could give us a 5-star review in iTunes, that would be awesome. We would really appreciate that. It's one way you can really support the show. And if you hop on just occasionally download this podcast and you enjoy it, if you could hit the subscribe button, that would really, really help us out, because that's how iTunes ranks the podcast. The more people that subscribe, the higher they go in the ratings, the more people see the show. And that would be good. If you like the show, that's good for everybody, because then we'll keep making the show. You'll keep getting to listen to the show. And that would make everybody happy. And if you hate the show, then why are you listening right now? There's probably better things you could do with your time than to listen to something that invokes, hatred and wrath. But main message: subscribe, give us a review. Let's get the show started. I recently updated the name of the podcast on the feed.
Yeah.
So now if you go into your podcast app or iTunes, it says Grounded Reason, Internet and Modern Tech TV. And the reason for that is because while we originally started as a cord cutting podcast, we've kind of branched into other topics, but the central theme seems to be around internet technology and and modern TV mechanisms. So I decided that that's probably going to be, the focus of the show from now on. And I kind of did this with my blog too. I kind of just went out there and started writing and figured out what the niche was.
You got to really cock your eyebrows when you say that one.
Yeah, niche. So I did the same with the podcast. As we're as time went on, we kind of started to kind of feel the flow of the podcast and where it was going. So I think if we, focus ourselves around internet and tech TV, then that pretty much covers many bases for us to talk about.
Those are giant topics.
Yeah. And we'll probably, we might refocus later on too, as time goes on. But I just want to give people a heads up, same podcast, we're not changing the format at all. It's
same
just
stuff.
to kind of give people an idea when they search in iTunes or their podcast app, what they're going to get when they click on the podcast.
We haven't been around long enough to jump the shark yet.
No, well, right? And Grounded Reason, it's kind of hard to know what that is, kind of without some kind of tagline.
Yeah.
And I did it that way on purpose, because when I picked the blog name, it was more of it was available. It was 2 words that meant something, and it was a .com. Right. So I was like, all right, I'll take it. Because really, that's what I was looking for, is just something that would kind of be memorable. And that's all it was. So really, that's there's no, I wish the story was better. I wish there was kind of I'll have to make one up and then delete this podcast.
Yeah.
This episode.
Build the lore.
Right. So, and today we're going to talk about kind of a technology that is really going to turn the internet. It's going to take it one step further. And
Well, I mean, why don't you mention what it is? And then I'll
we're
get
going to
on
talk
my
about blockchain today.
Yeah. And so when Dennis talks about like it's going to change the internet and you know turn things on its ear, I think what is really interesting about this is we think about like, and it became popular, I don't know, 10 years ago to start referring to everything as e-commerce.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Like
Yeah.
lowercase e, big C.
Yep.
And like, honestly, there's just so much more room for that to grow.
Oh, e-commerce?
And yeah. And I think blockchain is really it's the next obvious evolution of what people want to do in those spaces.
Right. And I mean, I got a good quote from somebody later on, but it's going to need a little background that actually kind of hits on that point that you're making about how it's not just information anymore,
right?
Almost. But first, because there's probably some people out there that is what is blockchain? Because I know they've probably heard the sexy buzzword.
They've heard of one of the chains,
Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Bitcoin is probably most people have heard of
the most common one.
It's the most common one out there because it's a cryptocurrency, which is basically it's a way to track. It's not a fiat currency where you know you have a government backing it.
Yep.
This is kind of like it's based on computer cryptology.
Yeah.
And they basically use mathematics and algorithms to have the trust that you would have with value exchanges.
Yeah, and it's
and I'll
interesting.
explain how it works in a minute.
Yeah, and just at an economics level, it's interesting in a couple different perspectives because currencies are really, and actually I got...
Go ahead. I know you love talking about this
man,
stuff.
I love this stuff. One of my favorite, if you're up really late or watching TV really early in the morning
and not listening to this podcast,
you will see these commercials come on where you will see people talk about like, you just need this software and it will help you trade currencies. Follow the green arrow up.
Yeah.
And the red arrow down, right? And man, I wish trading currencies was that simple.
I know.
It is remarkably complicated because effectively what you're doing is you're making a bet on how you think when you're talking traditional fiat currencies where it's to governments currencies.
Right, where it's not like the gold standard, it's more like I trust that country's economy.
I think the value of that country's economy is you know, this X of the other country.
Exactly.
Right? Like, and that's really, really hard. So then you go to something like a cryptocurrency, right? Like, so what we're talking about with Bitcoin, where, I mean, the technology is fascinating. Dennis will get into that in a second. But you also get all these really interesting things where people, again, are trying to go from something that has no backing by a government and say like, well, it's worth X units of dollars or Canadian currency because or whatever.
Like how many transactions are basically happening on this thing is kind of what they're kind of looking at. But then there's also a lot. I mean, there's a big speculator bubble going on.
Well, and it's burst 2 or 3 times already.
It goes up and down.
And then it's gone right back up. Right? Like, so it's a really, really fascinating thing.
Yeah, but see, I think that, and that's the thing is like people, because money is sexy. Money is interesting.
It is.
You know, watching green arrows and red arrows.
I love it.
A lot of fun.
I know that commercial is BS and I still watch it.
But I think that is why people have heard of Bitcoin, but not maybe some have heard of blockchain. And I think blockchain is really the important thing.
That's right.
That no one is really hearing about because everyone's blinded by all the cryptocurrencies out there.
Yeah, and
hitting the market.
Whenever I've been asked about like my opinion on this thing, and it's just, it's my opinion, so
take it for what it's worth.
Who knows whether Bitcoin's going to do well as a company and whether that currency is really going to be viable long term. I don't know. Nobody knows.
No.
But what blockchain is,
blockchain will
that
be
underpinning technology, that ain't going away. That is too valuable.
No. And essentially the way it works is it's really just a decentralized distributed database or a ledger. Yeah. Or like think about an Excel spreadsheet that like never, where a record just never gets deleted. Yeah. It's just a constant transactional
it's a append query.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. You just constantly writing to the same thing.
And it's a continually growing list of records, and those records are organized in blocks. Yep. And each block has a link to the previous block, hence the name blockchain. So it's really, but this is done through like a complex like system of rules. It's really a cryptography algorithm where the way Bitcoin works, say I pay, I want to buy a book from Joel and I send him like, the money in Bitcoin. What happens is I have a Bitcoin wallet, and that wallet has a private key, and the Bitcoins I own are attached to that private key, and there's an algorithm there. So to that you can't engineer, like you can't figure it out.
It's proprietary to them.
Right. Unless I give it. That's why your private key is just like anything else. You don't want to give it to anyone.
Of course.
But then I have a public key wallet, and I basically, Joel does too. So I say, okay, Joel's public key wallet, here is the money through Bitcoin. It goes right to Joel. Then it gets verified by people out there. There are nodes out there that it's called mining. I don't want to get too deep into that because that's a whole other episode. Yeah.
But just think of it as people who verify the transaction.
Right. It's basically everyone who is it's different people who are using Bitcoin, and they're out there mining, actually making some there's some incentive for them to do that.
They make a small transactional fee on doing the verification.
Minute.
Yeah.
But
it's really tiny, but if it's enough of it's worth their while.
Definitely. And it takes a lot of power to do that too, because, and we'll get to that in a second. But so once I pay them, you have everyone who's looking at this ledger, and there's no middleman. So the money shows up and it gets verified, and it's in Joel's Bitcoin wallet, and it takes all of a few minutes to do that.
Yeah.
So where, banking industry, you're talking a couple days it'll show up, but the contract, it doesn't actually get verified until like a few days later.
Well, and the other thing that's important to note is that the transaction Dennis was just describing, like between two individuals, in this case, he and I, it's, there's normally an intermediary of some sort, right? Unless it's just a straight cash transaction.
Right.
And in those instances, the fee is fairly significant.
Oh, definitely. I won't get into that.
You're gonna get into it more.
Yeah.
but in something like a cryptocurrency, it is so fluid that it's what we refer to in economics as like frictionless, right? Like it's free flowing in that the amount of time and the amount or the proportion of the transaction that is taken up by the person who's verifying both stakeholders is so tiny that it just doesn't really matter.
No, not at all. And what happens with this is all these transactions, they get a transaction key. They have a hash key, and that key combined with the key of the previous block, because the block has a key as well, they all kind of go into an encryption algorithm that locks it in. So this current block of transactions is reliant on the previous block, and then that block is on the previous block.
Right.
So in order for someone to, say, hack the blockchain,
you have to hack all subsequent blocks.
Since it's distributed, the blockchain is out on all these computers. It's not only every block previously, but every block previously on every computer involved in the network at the same time.
Yeah,
Because you have to do it
simultaneously.
You have to hack it all at the same time. And I mean, if you're looking at Bitcoin, I think I've heard it, and I don't know how true this is, but someone said that it would take the energy of the sun to be able to brute force it.
Who knows, right? Yeah. It's effectively impossible, and you know, people say that, and then of course someone figures it out. But it would be really, 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 really difficult,
right? And I mean, and the strength of it is that it is open and distributed, and it's out there. Because if you privatized it, you're only going to be as good as the actors that you put on verifying these transactions. Yeah. The beauty of it, of the the Bitcoin blockchain, is you have several thousands more nodes out there looking at this thing all the time. So it's, how are you going to change it if it's constantly being looked at and verified over and over and over and over again?
Right. And so just to pause us there, let's draw the distinction again. Because it's easy to really important distinction. There's blockchain, which is the underpinning technology that Dennis was using Bitcoin as an example to explain it.
And really, all blockchain is using an encryption algorithm to tie base data together. Really is all it is.
Previous transactions with current transactions.
And decentralize it. Look at it as like a database. Yeah. As really all it is. Yep. And the cool part about that is that since it is really just a ledger, you can put any kind of data you want on it.
This is the part that makes me totally geek out.
Yeah, because... well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, because the number... I think we're getting ready to get into, what do they call them? Smart contracts.
Well, yeah, because here's the thing. And you were kind of getting this a little bit earlier with the transaction fees.
Yeah, I got too excited.
Well, no. I mean, it's fine because I was going to get into it, but currently the way, like when I explain how the Bitcoin works, there's no one there that's taking a cut except for this. I mean, it's minute, and it's really just to fund the overall incentive network for people to verify the transaction. Yeah, because right now you're paying one institution to verify a transaction. This is, since it's many transactions that are being verified simultaneously to get that block into the blockchain, then it's it's going to be fractions. It's going to be fractions of a percent.
Yeah, and when we say fractions, we mean very small fractions. Yeah. And it's also, I mean, effectively what you're talking about is another algorithm doing it. So it is extremely fast.
So when you think of it in the sense of how we have a centralized system like this now, when we make any type of transaction, their banks, I mean, the Boston Consulting Group, they released a report saying that in 2015, the payments industry's revenue, I mean, this is banking, hit $1.1 trillion with a T, $trillion in 2015. Yeah. And they said that that's 29% of all global banking revenue.
Well, and the thing that I guess this is a little hard for people to get their minds around. Like, one, that's a big number.
It's huge.
Two, like, that only paints half of the picture, right?
And it's just, I mean, if you look at like your local business person, every time you swipe a credit card, they're taking like 3 to 5 or something.
Well, American Express, it used to be fairly steep with them. But yeah, I mean, like all of them charge a chunk. Even PayPal, who's got pretty small ones comparatively, which is why it's edged out a decent part of the internet transactions. But what I was saying is that you've got the portion of the money that's being exchanged hands, right? Like that's happened since the dawn of time, right? Just as someone who is verifying it, right? They take their cut. But then on top of that, there is the amount of time. And money and time are always proxies for each other, right? So, but there's the amount of time that is taken up by the middleman of whatever sort that is doing the transaction.
Right.
And in a scheme like a blockchain, it is almost no amount of time. You deal with the bank, or you deal with, I don't know, some other financial institution, etc., mortgage company, whatever. There's processing time associated with it.
Yeah.
So it's just business friction, right? It slows everything down.
Yeah, and it does. And not only that, but like since it's centralized, banks can get hacked.
Oh, yeah.
It happens. And
they're targets. That's the other thing.
And not only like banks, but I mean, because we're talking about data here. Any institution, you could put any kind of record you want out there. And I'll go into the different types of things people have considered using blockchain for in a minute. But any institution that has like a central register or ledger, that data is a single point of failure.
Yeah, I mean,
if you look from that company, maybe within the company they have redundancy and things like that. But I'm saying from like an external observer, there's a single point of failure with that institution.
Exactly. And just to be clear, this is not picking on Bank Day, right?
Oh, no.
Banks serve a purpose. They're jokingly say like, the only good bank is your bank, right? It's like, nobody likes a lawyer until you need one.
See, I was lucky enough to go to a conference for my other job, and the keynote speaker was a guy named Tapscott. Now, this guy is really into blockchain, and he calls it, and this is really like I did a lot of reading on blockchain after this keynote because he called it the trust protocol.
Yeah.
And the reason is that all these things, when it comes to banking and when it comes to contracts, it comes to escrow, it's about we need a third party to be a proxy for trust between two people.
It's exactly what their purpose is.
Right. So this, and it's not, and this does that. Yeah. This, I mean, having an open ledger where it's distributed and everyone can see the transactions, not necessarily the private information of the person making them, but a key is a proxy for that.
But they can see a transaction is happening.
Right. And it's completely distributed. Then we become the human
the collective.
The internet becomes the trust the trust proxy at that point. Mm-hmm. So it's, it's not like we're, and when he said that, after that, simmered for a minute or two, I was like, wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a really big deal.
Because we don't have to basically pay with this technology. It's possible that there is a future where we can actually trust one another without having a third party to broker things.
Yeah, the way I look at this, and I'll get into it just briefly about like how serious, and we're just using banking as one of the industries, but we'll talk about some of the others because there's a lot of others where this impacts. But banking's an obvious one. The way I think about this is not, the eradication of banks. It's not
at all. They're going to adapt.
It's the changing of banking, right? Mm-hmm. It's actually very similar to what happened and is still going on in the music industry and so on, right? Like,
and they're actually grabbing onto this a bit too.
Well,
but we'll get to that.
We'll get there, right? Yeah. And the big publishing houses for books, right? Like it's not doing away with the publishing houses, right? They're changing and their revenue model is changing, right? Like, so there's always gonna be a need for some amount of intermediation between transactions. It's just now that we have a way of making transactions move from place to place quickly, reliably, and securely,
right?
We need not pay as much as we used to.
Right.
And that's what it gets down to.
And it's not just in banking.
No, it's in. I'm sorry, I probably was loud when I kind of laughed at that. It's in a tremendous amount. But before we get out of banking, can we talk about a couple other big ones that are
of course
still within the financial industry?
Sure.
Like one of the ones that I think is going to be fascinating to see how it breaks out, because it's that smart contracts idea. Because so far what we've talked about is really just currency, right? Like effectively money.
Yes.
And really the only data outside of money that's going on in a Bitcoin transaction, for the most part, is who the two parties are.
Right. And the process
and why they're doing it.
Exactly. And that's the thing with smart contracts is the why they're doing it. The
gets
why they're
much more elaborate, or can get much more
why they're doing it is outside of the technology.
Yeah.
It's we've made a decision and we're going to do this. But and this is the beauty of this.
Yeah.
It's just a database, really.
Yeah.
So you can put any data you want in there. So you could put the data on the ledger that, I don't know, might be, I have a contract with somebody, I want these things completed. I can hold that data on the ledger. When that data goes to the value that indicates that what I want, and then the contract's complete. Not only that, but there can be some code running on top of that that actually pays my account when the contract is done.
I'll blow your mind with this one, or at least I'll blow my mind. Because what you just described is escrow, right?
It is. Escrow is just...
That's what escrow is.
Completely automated.
Right? But not only could escrow be automated, but in many instances, escrow could actually, like the completion of whatever tranche of work that releases funds from escrow could actually be verified by a sensor from the Internet of Things.
Oh, it could.
Right?
Oh, that
I'm
totally
sorry.
could.
My nose is bleeding from that thought. That's the future we're going towards, right? Like it's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, and that's another thing that Mr. Tapscott said at this, which was another thing that kind of blew me away a bit, was how blew me away a bit.
Well, and
a bit. That's
sentence. Not a thing. Yeah.
No, you can't be blown away. I was a bit blown away by. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, but what he said is the internet is its main, I don't want to say currency because too much, but it's
loaded in this.
I know, but it's really it's information. It's we found a way to make information easily accessible.
Yeah, that's really
Blockchain adds another facet to that, because now the internet is not just information, but value as well.
Sure.
And that, once you have those two things,
that's a heck of a combination. I mean, that's not everything in life, but that's a big chunk of life. Right?
Yeah, the life we've created. Yes,
well, and what I mean when I say life, I mean economic activity, right? Like when you're talking value and information, you really are capturing most everything that goes into a contract.
Yeah.
Right? And so when I want to be clear, because like I know sometimes I hope I don't, but I probably come off like these are like my thoughts when I'm like, oh, this is fascinating and blah blah blah. No, it's just I'm a fan, right? Like I love this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed by the work. Yeah, the work that people are doing in this, and it's still. I mean, like the thing that really makes me giddy about it, like, because I'm not planting any flags with like anything I'm saying, but like when I read about what these guys are doing, what's impressive to me is that this stuff is still new. It's still in its infancy.
And the cool part about
it's already pretty impressive.
Is it's all open source. Yep. So if you can code a bit, you can go out and grab it. You can go ahead and go out and grab the blockchain, software and just run with it.
And what's great about that, in my opinion, is that so I was just kind of like pointing at an obvious one. And again, so many smarter people than me have pointed at like mortgages or auto financing or whatever, right? Like big, obvious stuff. But some really smart person is going to come up with something where they grab one of these snippets of open source code and they figure out, hey, this type of transaction that we deal with right now normally involves, an intermediary and blah, blah, blah. And it could be, streamlined in this way. And they're going to start a company and it's going to be the next big thing.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be something we're not even thinking about.
It's going to disrupt the disruptors because, one thing you can do is, and I'm borrowing from, again, Don Tapscott, because he mentioned Airbnb.
Sure.
Because what you could do is, since everybody, if you have this ledger, then you can have a key on that ledger. It's essentially almost like you can almost have like an avatar for your business or for you or whatever. But you could sit there and, because it's they call it like Airbnb and Uber, the sharing economy. Right. This, you still need a company like Uber or Airbnb to manage the trust of that sharing economy. Yeah. This could disrupt Airbnb, because I totally see where if you have a public, like a B&B blockchain out there, and you're going to have people that have all the data of, because you can, a data is pictures, a data could be video, the data could be.
Yeah, you just need something on the other end to translate it.
Right. So you just put an interface on it and you go in and you're like, okay, this place, boom. And then the smart contract thing we talked about earlier could negotiate. You can put that on top of it and negotiate all of the terms and everything else. And since it's a smart contract, you hit OK, it books it, moves the funds, tells you when to go there. I mean, yeah, there's going to be a human touch there, I'm sure, when you get there. But, I mean, you could automate all of the back and forth contract stuff that Airbnb currently does. Yeah. And they're out of work because I can just do this on my own using the blockchain.
That's just one example, right? Like, because where people would where I could see another company, let's say a blockchain started for something like that, where I could see another company springing up would be around building the interface to interpret the chain.
Well, that's a thing too, because there is privacy issues. Sure. Because you have a key, but, it's not hard for one to, because you have to give your public wallet. Your public wallet needs to be given so you can pay it. Or in Bitcoin. That's just a Bitcoin example. But there's going to be a public
general
number.
Idea, though, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, with certain things, like if you wanted to get into healthcare, because I actually do think this is a great application for healthcare records. Sure. But you need some sort of go-between to ensure privacy.
Yeah, and again, it's taking it out of, like, the database, just to continue using that term, and putting it in a way, like in an interface that a human can interpret, right? Like you have to have some sort of interface where we can look at it and go, yes, I like that apartment.
Yeah, but that exists with like things like a good example is Abra, which it's really going to kill Western Union, and it's already out because you know how people will come to, like, they'll leave their country and go to US, UK, and send money back home. Yeah. Well, those people get hosed on wire transfer fees.
Fees are steep. And there are a lot, I will say, the internet has already taken big chunks out of Western Union, because those fees used to be brutal. Right. But it was really
a lot.
bad.
I remember when I was young, I had to get a wire transfer when I was like 16. I got stranded somewhere. And
you're talking high single digits, if not double digits. Yeah. And that's a lot out of a transaction.
Well, this Abra app, it's an app, and it uses, blockchain technology, and you can send some money to someone in another country, and then within the app, there are Abra tellers who will kind of Uberish, where you just say, yeah, this person, they'll come to your house.
I read an article about this.
They'll pay you out on the money that was just sent to you, and the fee is like 2%, 1%, 2%, or something like that.
Yeah, and they'll pay you in whatever the national
because they'll send it in
currency
Bitcoin. Because they'll use, I think it's a Bitcoin transaction or some type of cryptocurrency transaction.
Well, the reason you do that is you want something that is non-national,
exactly,
to
because
be the intermediary.
Because you don't have to deal with the exchange rates at that point. So then you get there. The Bitcoin gets there like in like
instantly
10 minutes. Well, it takes about like, a couple minutes to verify the transaction.
That's more or less instant.
In finance, definitely, because you're talking 3 days if I'm going to, do an ETF transfer.
Oh my God. Don't get me started.
Or excuse me, an EFT. So, but so the money gets there. They click on the Abra teller. The person shows up at their house, pays them. The Bitcoin gets transferred over to them, 2% off the top, which is like leaps and bounds above what that used to be for like a remittance fees.
Well, and you have to also think about first of all, remittances is a gigantic industry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, I keep saying first of all and then saying a new topic.
Seventh of all.
Yeah, seventh of all. Just in the United States, the number of people who pass remittances back to other countries is very, very large. I'll do some research on it. But
because a lot of people, come here for a better way of life.
Well, they come here for a better way of life, and they
send their money. They send a lot of their money back.
Good chunk of change back to support the rest of their family, and
because it goes very far over there.
But so it's a gigantic industry, and in many countries, particularly in Mexico, Central America, and South America, it can be a significant portion of their GDP, and so you're talking a lot of money. And if you shave off, in these instances, we're talking 5, maybe 8, 10% off of that transaction, and actually put it back into the economy instead of into the pocket of the intermediary. That's a really, really big deal.
It is. It's huge, and that's and when you put the money there in the consumer's hands, it goes further. I mean, there's more economic action that happens.
Yeah, I was going to say you get a multiplier, right? Like for every dollar you put in to the economy in a consumer's hand, rather than just an intermediary's hand, you end up with,
because it's usually up at the top of the food chain at that point. You don't know where that money's going to
go. It's like a 1.2x instead of a 2.4x or what.
Whatever the number is. I'm going
to
cut that out.
I don't blame you. I mean, because those were hypothetical numbers. I don't know what they are, but it is known that consumers, you get more economic.
I like when you talk about the economics, but multipliers.
Don't come at me.
We need to have a whole episode. We need to have a primer on economic multipliers if we're going to go down that road.
You're an economic multiplier. I was saying, blockchain's really good.
So, but when it comes to impoverished nations, the third world, because a lot of people, they're in a country, they're not doing well. That's why they send someone here.
Sure.
And a lot of, and I was shocked to hear this, but in a lot of the world, there are, we have title scams here where, you buy something, you get a title on it, and there's some kind of scamminess around it. I mean, that happens. But in other, undeveloped countries, it's rampant. Yeah. And not only that, but say you're in a country that's not very stable, a new dictator comes in, and they say, "Oh, that house you own, there was a title mix-up," and they can just use that and give it to someone else.
Yeah, I get where you're going.
That happens a lot. I mean, I know in America we usually don't have to hear troubles like that.
Well, but where you're going, I think, is basically that surprisingly, when we think about these technologies, we normally are like, oh, the developed countries, we're going to hop all over this. It's going to be great, blah, blah, blah. The people who normally actually benefit the most from these kind of individually empowering technologies,
which is exactly what this is.
Yeah, are the developing nations.
Yeah, and
right?
that's what it is because they
don't have institutions.
Yeah, and they don't need they need a cell phone, which is very easy to get these days.
Well, and just to pause you there for a second, that's the one that is pointed to as the case in point, right? Because the case in point is that once the developing world got cell phones, all of a sudden, they didn't need to go through the governmental or corporate intermediaries for everything.
Right.
Right? They could reach out to the producers throughout the rest of the world via the internet and get what it was they needed.
Right. And this actually helps them
This just amps it up.
because you can get, like, with a blockchain, you could have immutable records.
Yep.
You know, you own something, you could have it up in the blockchain. Put the title up there. So you can prove ownership at any time. You're not relying on some government agency to do it. You're not relying on some company to do it.
Right.
It's just there.
Well, think about how when you are in a country where the judiciary is not as, I'll say, robust as it is in the developed world. If you and the records management and so on is not as robust. If you're trying to prove that the land you have is yours, right? It's a really, really big deal, and often very, very difficult.
Extremely difficult.
And
impossible, really. Especially if someone's rigging the game on you.
Yeah. So having something like a blockchain that you could put in front of a judiciary resolves the issue.
Yeah, it's done.
Right?
Yeah, and because because here scams do happen, and records mix-ups happen.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like impossible to prove. But if you're out there in, if it's out in the blockchain, it's there for everyone to see.
Yeah, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, couldn't you, as additional verification of whose...
If you give them the key.
Yeah, I was going to say...
the public key.
Whose key it was and whose part of the chain it was. Like, you could put information about yourself, like, your fingerprint or whatever, in the chain.
Oh, yeah, anything you want, really. I mean, and that's another thing is...
As verification.
Identity. But before we get to that, I know you wanted to talk about some of the stuff that's happening in the banking... Because we were talking about the banking sector and how... Because it almost sounded like, the big bad banking sector.
No,
and
yeah.
it really... We don't mean to sound that way at all.
No. And in fact, anybody who finds that industry or... Like, I personally believe, and if everybody hasn't figured this out, I like this stuff.
I put all my money under the mattress.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? Coffee cans. So, like...
I stick my bitcoins right underneath the mattress.
Right under the mattress? There's a great book called The Ascent of Money, and it basically walks through, like, money starting in Babylonia all the way up to present day, more or less. Oh, yeah.
That sounds... I mean, I know everyone... I mean, for me, that sounds awesome.
Everybody else just fell asleep. But for me, that's beach reading. But as I was doing research for you good people out there, because it's all for you, one of the things I did find out is there's a study by Accenture, the consulting company, that 9 out of the 10... major banks in North America are researching, and it sounds like fairly seriously, blockchain, like some sort of proprietary blockchain, right? And that tells you a couple of things, right? Like, one, they get it, right? They get this is a serious way of doing business. Two, at least some of them, right? Because it probably won't be all. But at least some of them will adapt.
Oh, yeah. And because they know either they're going to get into it because they see it as a threat to their business or because they see it as a viable technology. Because it will save...
both.
It'll work. It can work for them to where they're saving, especially some of the smaller banks. Like, if you're a smaller bank, I would jump all over this because it'll give you an opportunity it'll give you an edge against some of those bigger companies.
Well, and that's what normally happens.
Right.
You get a mid-tier person who jumps all over it, gets good at it, and they become a big, top-tier person.
And here, I'll show my hand. I banks are important, but I feel as though, especially since, the fall of the Glass-Steagall Act, that
I'm not a fan.
Banks have kind of gotten a bit too big for their britches, and I would love to kind of see some of the smaller banks have a mechanism to kind of, refederate the banking industry
distribute
a bit.
it back out a little.
Exactly.
Well, and I think something that's like just noteworthy with this is that they'll likely sink a lot of money and time into this, but only a few will be able to adapt to it, right? Like,
and it'll probably be those leaner banks.
Yeah, probably.
Because usually that's what happens. If you have, big wheels, big company, big engine, it takes a while to get things going.
We did say, I think, on a previous podcast that, like, if you're really rich, you can be a little dumb.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Like, so
you can just buy the smaller bank that got the good idea.
Buy them, and so that it's entirely possible. So it's really hard to predict.
It is.
Like, don't try and pick winners out of who's going to survive.
It's just my pipe dream that we actually,
I mean,
might have a little more competition in the banking
It's quite
sector.
possible, but like the way I look at it is that, so you take a credit card, like take consumer credit. Right, like, which is effectively what a credit card is, right? Like when consumer credit was introduced in the late '60s, maybe early '70s, but when it was introduced, there were people that were like, "Oh, this is a terrible idea," and so on and so forth. And, we're going to be giving out money too cheap. It doesn't make any sense.
Look at the numbers now.
Yeah, look at the
people using consumer.
But what happened was the number of transactions went up so dramatically that, like, it's like 30% of their revenue. Yeah, of course.
Right now.
Right, like, because who carries around cash?
No one.
So, anyways, the point I'm making is just this. That, like, there's gobs of money to be made for the big banks in the use of blockchain. Because what will happen just over time, and it'll be a little while, is as things move over that direction.
Which it will.
We both think
Yeah.
it's inevitable, so take that for what it's worth. But as they move over that way, the number of transactions, because the amount of friction in the market goes down, the number of transactions will just go up dramatically.
Yeah.
People will just have more contracts.
Yeah, I mean, and it's supply and it's a cost ratio.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting there, it's like if it's cheaper to do that thing, you're going to do more of that thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if now it costs me, let's say I'm someone
at selling a house.
Sure.
Look at that. Let's take that. Selling a house, it's ridiculous. Oh. The amount of money.
There are fees associated with everything. Escrow.
If you could sell your house through a smart contract
and execute it extremely quickly,
then an escrow, you don't have to pay for escrow. It's all in a smart contract. Then it's going to be much, because that's a big thing where people are like, if they want to move, they have to look at the numbers and like, we just can't. We can't do it.
Right.
Moving would be houses would be bought and sold
much more fluid
on a huge multiplier.
Well, and
more than they are now.
What's wild about that is such a big transaction, right? In terms of like, house isn't like going to 7-Eleven and getting a Coca-Cola.
The market, the cost of selling is such a huge deterrent to selling.
That's my point.
Right.
Is that like a few percentage points move in like the number of houses sold is a gigantic thing, because that is such a big market. So anyways, I digress, but really where I was getting at was just that the banks, I think, realize, like Dennis said, that this is, double-sided sword. Is that the expression?
Yeah.
Two-edged sword. Two-edged sword.
Yeah.
I know stuff.
Yeah, because you don't want to hit yourself in the face. With
right.
The sharp side.
Clearly,
but if both sides are sharp.
Clearly, we were both fencers in high school.
Be careful.
Yeah. But so they realize that it is a bit of a threat, but it's also a pretty big opportunity. So, but you were going to talk about...
there's a Chinese proverb.
There's one for everything.
Yeah.
You were going to talk about some of the other major industries where you anticipate this being a big deal.
Well, okay. Well, we mentioned the immutable records like title. Yeah. Any kind of ownership of anything is pretty much going to be handled by blockchain.
And that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? Like
any record.
That's basically everything from your home to the songs you get off iTunes.
You won't need that big box of paperwork everyone's toting around in their house of like, here's all the stuff I own and here's my, identity records.
Yeah.
Like you could have your identity records, and because people are like, well, what if it goes down? Well, the blockchain is kind of spread out among multiple nodes on the internet. So it's like backed up redundantly to like the 1000th degree.
If the chain goes down,
we have bigger problems than our birth certificate.
It means the internet has gone down. Right. If the internet has gone down,
and not like your router in your house.
No, I mean the internet has gone down.
Yes, like there is no internet to connect to.
Yeah, I mean that's. Do I have enough gasoline and bullets to like survive?
At this point, it is
right. Yeah, that's a big deal.
So I mean, there's that. Then there's also like with identity. Like imagine healthcare, health records, everything else. That's a huge annoyance if you have to switch providers to get all your records over to your next provider. If you could almost create an identity avatar where anything important to you could have a virtual avatar that connects all those dots.
Yeah, and in fact, I hesitate to say that is inevitable, but I think that is likely.
Yeah, I think it's likely, and a lot of people get concerned with privacy issues, and that's where I think you'll probably have some people where there's probably going to be some opportunity for money and profit, where you can set up a intermediate that basically does the transaction for you to get information into your identity.
Yeah,
so that'll obscure it to where it can't be tracked back to you, and then you're completely anonymous.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned Kos on the podcast before, but he's a guy who basically won a Nobel Prize for saying that, or he said a lot of really smart things, but in economics for laying out that like people who profit in a market with any kind of friction are really the people who manage transaction costs, and like the people who will make real money in this whole thing. Yeah. They'll be the ones who help markets get from where we are to the blockchain.
Yep.
Right? So, like, there will be a firm, or more likely a set of firms, like probably a large set, that will help move our identities to something like what we're talking about. And those guys are gonna make gobs of money.
Yeah. I mean, anything is contract-based.
Yeah.
Like your job, you getting paid every 2 weeks is contract-based.
Absolutely.
So anything like that, there can be a contract around it. You could do with the blockchain. You could do, I don't know, like your Social Security, any type of government, like your Social Security number could just be a blockchain hash. And at that point, there's requirements to meet, certain age, certain other requirements. Once those are met, payout. I mean, it could happen completely. You might not even have to file. I mean, if the government got on board,
I wouldn't think you'd have to at all.
No, it would just, the requirements are there. If the information,
Think about how taxes could be executed.
Oh, well, I don't. That's another episode about why the taxes, because you could automate all the taxes. Every government could just kind of just send you what you owe every year based on what the information that they have.
Touché.
But do you know why they don't? All of the tax companies that make tons of money lobby against any kind of act.
Gigantic industries that are, again, it's transaction costs, right?
They want to
the people who manage
those
transaction costs.
Yeah, H&R Block does not want the government sending you any kind of information.
We're looking at you, H&R Block.
Or that was just the one I thought of. TurboTax.
I can't think of another one.
I can't either. There's also intellectual property.
Ooh.
We didn't even get it.
We forgot about
it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of implied, but yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. So the way it used to work is you were a band and, you had to sign with some label and they would take a huge cut of money, but those people would still get paid. A decent amount. And then after a while, as the record companies started making more and more money, those people started getting paid less and less to where, a one-hit wonder, might buy you a pizza and a six-pack, at the end of the 90s. Because they really weren't. I mean, people think it's a glamorous life and everything, but they were so much.
It was a hard gig.
Yeah, so much was getting taken off the top. I mean, those people, if you one song maybe hit top 40, that's nothing. But nowadays with blockchain, and this is already happening. This is real. This already exists, where you can tie your digital property. Say you write a song, or you write a book, or you have a podcast or something else. You can actually put it in the blockchain and put a smart contract around it and put all the licensing rights. You can add that in there. You can say, okay, if I want my song to be a ringtone, it's this much money. If I want my song to be used in a movie, it's that much money. If I want my song to be listened to, it's a couple cents or whatever. And then, you set it all up, and then it just runs, and your song or your book or whatever,
whenever it's used,
becomes a business, a shop that just sits out there and collects money,
picks up pennies every hour,
and you get if you're an artist, you get all of the profit. It's all yours. There's no middleman. Anything.
Well, because the publishing is on the internet, right? And to public, I mean, case in point, us. We're sitting. Obviously, we're not a big
in our luxurious studio.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Luxurious. Someone's rubbing my shoulders right now. Okay, so we're sitting in my basement.
That only happens when I go to Floyd's barbershop.
That we're sitting in my basement and there's literally piles of laundry all around us.
Don't ruin the illusion.
Yeah, but I think I did that 7 episodes ago. But
Joel's always ruining the illusion.
It's been knocking me my whole life. It's kind of a big deal, right? We're proof. I mean, so are lots of other people, but that putting out content is not that hard these days.
No, it's not.
Right? Anybody who has something they want to say can say it, right? That's the beauty of the internet.
Yeah, it only takes. Actually, if you have a cell phone, you could.
That's about it.
You could podcast if you just have a cell phone,
especially if you had a nice one. Yeah. That's all you really need.
Yep.
Yeah, I can go look on YouTube, and there's mountains of stuff where people have just done it with a cell phone.
Oh yeah, I mean you could. Robert Rodriguez when he made El Mariachi. You know how he did that?
Oh, I think you did tell me.
Oh, did I? It was basically 2 VCRs and a tape recorder, and that's how he edited the whole film. And this is the guy that made Spy Kids,
Yeah.
and that's how he did it. So, and that was back.
Although, I mean, like, seriously, you pointing to El Mariachi, which is like a masterpiece, and then jumping to Spy Kids.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying that's his major kind of money making hit. I just wanted to show.
Probably make a lot of money.
Oh yeah, a lot of money. So, but he and he did that in the early '90s. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, 93, I think.
I can only imagine, like, with the technology you have today at your fingertips, like, anyone could do that. Anyone could go out. Anyone with the talent could just pick up a device and just make a thing.
And again, we're totally proof that you need almost no talent at all to be able to put stuff on the internet.
It's true. It's totally true. And now with blockchain, you can
get paid for it.
Get paid for it. Easily.
Yeah, well, and you can get paid for it in a secure manner and in a consistent manner, right? Like, you don't need to negotiate, dozens and dozens of different contracts. You can have a single contract type, or as many as you wanted, but, like, you could have one.
Here are my rules, and go at it,
or don't.
Right. Yeah. It's up to the consumer at that point. Your contract is just with the consumer. There is no third party that needs to.
Doesn't have to be.
It's great. And one more thing with identity, because and a lot. I don't know if a lot of people. Some people realize this, but there's a lot of you're out there as a person on the internet. You're out there every day. And companies are making boatloads of money off your data trail. Lots of money. And companies are kind of getting on this, and there's companies that will actually kind of sweep up behind you and put all your data in a bucket for you so you can monetize it. That exists. Yeah. But then you have to pay this intermediary to do that. And it's if you need proof, like physical, tangible proof, you can get paid for taking surveys. I mean, that's out there. You go in there.
I've done it.
Right. But this is stuff like you do.
You don't get paid a lot. But you can get paid. You can.
But like, if you had a bucket of data of everywhere you've been and your all the data associated with, like, your demographic, you could sell that. Yep. Like, that right there is gold in the bank.
Yeah, that's actually a valuable commodity.
Very valuable. So if you had something like blockchain and your identity, and you had all that stuff out there, and you're tracking yourself, then you can sell that information if you want. Like, if you're a big privacy nut, you probably don't want to.
Right.
But if you don't care, Google's doing it anyway.
Right.
Like, Google is tracking every move you have. But instead, if you routed all that stuff into your blockchain identity, you could have a huge bucket of data that you could monetize and sell and just make money off living your life.
Yeah.
With blockchain.
Yeah, I mean,
and then you're owning your own data and information and profiting on it instead of some other company.
Yeah, and so to make what you're saying a little less abstract, because, like, it sounds
it's
like
marketing.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
They want to know what you are, where you are going, who you are,
because 2/3 of our economy is consumer based. Mm-hmm. So if I can get you to buy my thing as opposed to Dennis's thing,
so yeah, if they can take my profile, my identity profile, and figure out, okay, this guy likes to buy this stuff. And then they look at another identity profile and they're like, okay, these guys are very similar and they're both buying these things. All right. And then they do that like 1,000 times. And then they're like, all right, that guy likes to buy, this guy likes to watch Ash vs. Evil Dead on Stars, and I love that show. I do too. But, and then they just know, okay, he likes that show. He buys these things. So we will market these things on that show. So other people like him will buy that stuff.
I will say, like, the classic example I've heard of this, and this wasn't through internet traffic directly. It was actually through, I think it was credit card transactions at Target that I heard where, and Target got in a little bit of trouble for this type of thing. But, like, so the golden ticket from a, big box store, consumer store like Target or a grocery store or a Walmart or so on is a woman that is
Pregnant.
pregnant.
The story is awful.
It's notorious.
It's a true story. I've heard this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's very true. It's double true. It's so like typically it's a woman who's pregnant,
And this is in the early stage of that social marketing thing.
yeah,
where they're like,
I want to say it was like 2007.
yeah,
And so like it's and the reason why that's such a golden ticket is that, I mean, you got to think about it. Like for anyone who has kids, this will probably be obvious, but for those that don't, it's so you got a person who's getting ready to have a baby. There's tons and tons of expenses that come along with that. There's also tons and tons of other people that are going to be buying you stuff that goes along with that. And then when you finally have the child, you're going to be so exhausted that you're just going to go to wherever you went to last time to get stuff.
right.
And so, and that proves itself out in the data. But that's why it's a golden ticket. Where it was is there apparently was a gentleman who had a daughter who was early in high school, who started receiving, oh, congratulations on your impending, baby.
Right.
We're so excited for you. Here's a package of all these care things from Target. And this father got really upset because he's like, my daughter's not sexually active.
Yeah, why are you sending me all these things?
This? What they had done was they looked at like the kind of stuff from the credit card statement this person was buying, this young woman was buying, and they were like, yeah, she's pregnant.
Right.
And it was like,
you don't need to buy
whatever it was.
You don't need a pregnancy test anymore.
Yeah,
you can just ask Target.
Just ask Target. And so, but getting back, circling way back to Dennis's point, is that like, the same is even more true with like your broader internet traffic, right? Like,
they know you inside out.
They know you inside and out. They can tell whether you're right-handed and you got blue eyes. And
how many kids you have.
And you feel stiff in your left leg when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, they know everything about you.
They know everything. And that information is very valuable to people who sell things.
Right. So if we all had a blockchain and we all owned it, then we can decide what companies get to see that data.
Yeah.
And we get to pick and choose the companies we're going to support, and we're going to get money for it.
Yeah, I don't even care who the company is, as long as I get money for it.
Well, I mean, but if you wanted to, you could not only, support companies by buying their goods, but you could also support companies by selling your information to them. It's a give and take at that point.
Yeah.
You're both they're a consumer to you at that point.
Yeah, it's true.
So, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, the blockchain. I know it really has the potential to kind of change the dynamic of, supply and demand.
Yeah, of commerce.
Commerce, yeah.
I mean, and I think we've kind of tripped over ourselves, like complimenting the technology set that is blockchain. But, we're just so excited about it because it is really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in the hype cycle. Everyone's they're very excited about it. And when that happens, there's going to be some Gartner, the company, they call it the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah, that's actually their term.
Yeah, after everyone's excited, then they're disappointed because the payoff wasn't as good. But then the technology starts to stabilize, and then it gets good, and then everyone's kind of where they were originally.
There's a classic chart on when back in the 1920s, so automobiles were still new. And I think it was the 20s.
Why do I want to drive a car?
Well, this was all about like vulcanized tires, right? Like all of a sudden there were hundreds of companies that were making tires, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's a big classic spike of producers. And then, everyone's like, oh, we need so many tires. You can have 1,000 companies that make them. And then, almost all of them went bankrupt except for 4, right? Or whatever it was.
Yes.
The same 4 that are still here. And they're great, and they make wonderful tires. But it doesn't mean that industry isn't viable. It just means people get a little too excited, like Dennis and I today, right? And, they start a new blockchain company that's, and that's why I say it's very useful to separate like the individual companies that are pushing this technology from the technology.
Right.
It's like talking about companies that do work via the internet in 1993 from the internet.
Yeah. And when it comes down to it, I value this technology because it puts power back in the hands of the individual.
I actually don't even think it's back in the hands. I think it puts it in the hands.
That's true. That's exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's totally true.
It's been in the hands.
That's right. It does. And that's why I'm a big proponent.
Yeah.
Because I see it as a way of
empowering people.
Exactly. And kind of trying to, because right now we live in kind of a corporatocracy.
Yeah, and now granted, if you look at the fees we pay and like the kind of, things we had to do, and you compared it 200 years ago, like it's infinitely better than where we were, right?
Oh, yeah, well, hey,
but
I don't want to go back to 18. No, don't want that. But you know what? I don't compare myself to the guy that lived in 1810.
I do. Does that make me weird? Maybe a little.
I don't think we should. I mean, I like to compare myself against,
modern day people.
Modern day folk.
Gosh, I got to work on that. But yeah, no, I think you have a really good point. It's this idea of like,
because we're relative beings.
Yeah.
I mean,
we do live in a society where large companies have a tremendous amount of influence on us. But frankly, you could make the argument about the government too. It's really large institutions.
Right. It's true. And this is a way, and really, and I'll get back to the point that I made, in the beginning that I stole, from Don Tapscott, about trust. And that's really what it is. It's because we, for some reason, can't trust one another. We need to have these firms and institutions to proxy trust.
Yeah.
And blockchain is a way where you have so many eyes on it that the individual trust is back. It's a kind of, it almost brings a tear to my eye. It really does.
Well, it's a very democratic idea.
It really is. I know that sounds kind of, saccharine sweet or whatever, but I'm dead serious. It's
It does only because of the way we're phrasing it. But, it really is one of those things that is exactly what people are going for when they live in a democracy. The idea of empowering the individual with things that should be at least almost exclusively theirs, right?
Yeah.
Like my labor, my money, my data,
right?
Right? Like it's mine, right? Like so, just for me to do a transaction of whatever sort with Dennis, I shouldn't have to pay at least a significant amount of that to anyone else.
Exactly.
Right? Like I'm doing it with that person, right? Like so.
Yeah, and that's what it gets down to. I mean, is trust. It's all really. This is a way to bring trust back to humanity.
Yeah. So God bless cryptography.
Yep. I never thought I'd say that.
I normally wake up saying that. Whatever. Okay. Whatever works for you. I don't know.
Okay, well, I think we've said all we can about blockchain. At least we've said all we can about blockchain.
Yeah, or all we should.
So, I'm Dennis Restaro.
And this is Joel Reeves.
And we'll see you next week. So after that episode, who has questions? Well, if you do, just give us a call at 650-TALK-GRP. You don't like talking on the phone or talking into voicemail, you can always send us an email. That address is podcast@groundedreason.com. You can tweet at us it's actually at Grounded Reason. Facebook page. All that stuff's in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. You got questions, we'll answer them on the air. Or, if you just have a question you don't want to be on the air, let us know. I'll just, I'll reply and answer your question. Because that's what we're all about here, is trying to make technology less insular. The tech sector is a bit kind of closed off from everybody. We just want to kind of get that information out there and in the hands of everybody. Next week, we will talk about, what are we talking about next week? Some kind of tech stuff. I'll see you then.